Easter-related Bible trivia question for you here today. Who killed Jesus? Now, if you've been in church for any length of time, you probably already know the answer. The Jews killed Jesus. That idea has been preached for centuries, has been taught to children, has been baked into sermons, passion plays, Holy Week readings, but that has real consequences and doesn't entirely reflect the story in the Gospels. Let's talk about why. Hey everyone, I'm Colin, the resident nerd and Bible scholar here at the Bible Uncut and Unfiltered. This notion that the Jews as a group killed Jesus has led to quite a bit of violence. Entire Jewish communities, long after the time of Jesus, have been labeled Christ killers. Violence, discrimination, pogroms, and modern anti-Semitism have all been justified using religious language. And this isn't even ancient history. Even recently, several Republican members of Congress argued against legislation meant to curb anti-Semitic rhetoric because they said it would prevent them from making what they called the biblical claim that the Jews killed Jesus. That should stop us in our tracks, because that claim is not just morally dangerous, it's biblically wrong. The first mistake Christians make is imagining the crucifixion as Jesus and the Christians versus the Jews. There was no Christianity yet. Jesus was Jewish. The disciples were Jewish. The crowds were Jewish. The debates that Jesus had were in-house Jewish debates. This is not a story of one religion replacing another. It is a family argument inside Second Temple Judaism. And if that's the case, why then was Jesus killed? It's not because he was trying to replace Judaism with Christianity. That's not how the Gospels portray him at all. When Jesus gets challenged on Torah, Sabbath, purity laws, fasting, you name it, he almost always responds by showing that he is actually honoring the heart of the law. He doesn't reject Torah, he argues like a Jewish rabbi. Exactly what he was. What actually puts a target on Jesus' back is politics. Jesus went around announcing a kingdom, but not just any kingdom, a kingdom that borrowed Rome's language while also subverting Rome's power. Good news, Lord, Savior, peace. Those are not religious words. They were imperial, political words that Jesus co-opted. Jesus rides into Jerusalem on a donkey in deliberate parody of Roman victory processions. He flipped tables in the temple during Passover when Jerusalem was packed with pilgrims and Roman troops already on edge. He talked about kingdom where the poor are lifted up and the powerful are brought low. That would not have threatened the average Jewish person of his day. Most of them loved it. That's why Palm Sunday happened. The people threatened by Jesus are the ones who were deeply entangled with the Roman political power system, Rome itself, and a small group of elite leaders whose authority depended on keeping the peace. That brings us to the verse people always point to. Matthew 27:25, where the crowd cries out, "His blood be on us and on our children." That single verse has done more damage than almost any other line in the New Testament. But it needs context. First, the phrase is borrowed from the Hebrew Bible. Blood being on someone is covenant language about responsibility and consequences. It's not a magical curse for all of time. Second, just because people say something in a biblical narrative does not automatically mean that God agrees with what they said or even enacts it. So just because someone pronounces a curse does not mean that God goes along with that idea. Third, Matthew is the only gospel writer who includes this line. That should tell us something. Many scholars believe that Matthew's community, likely a Jewish Christian group, was experiencing tension with other Jewish communities who hadn't followed Jesus. That conflict probably shaped how Matthew chose to tell his story. And it wouldn't have sounded anti-Semitic coming from Matthew himself, because Matthew was almost certainly Jewish. Personally, I think Matthew may have even been doing something more ironic here. The crowd says Jesus' blood would be on them. And from Matthew's theological perspective, that's exactly what salvation is supposed to look like. Matthew is playing around with words in a brilliant literary construct here. But even if you take the passage as many English readers have, there's still another problem. It is extremely unlikely, historically, that Pilate, a Roman governor already on thin political ice with his superiors, would have allowed a random crowd to decide who lives and who dies. That scene functions more like theology than journalism. And here's the key point. All four Gospels agree on this much. The people who had the legal authority to execute Jesus were not the Jews, but the Romans. The sentence was Roman. The method was Roman. The soldiers were Roman. And yet we don't hear Italians being called Christ killers. At most, if you wanted to assign blame historically, you could only point to a very small group of specific individuals involved in turning Jesus over to Rome. That is a fraction of first century Judeans. And to project that blame onto Jewish people today, 2,000 years later, that's not good theology. That's scapegoating. And it only makes sense if you have already built a theology that believes in things like inherited guilt, where people are punished for actions that they didn't commit. Ironically, even the Catholic Church figured this out decades ago. In 1965, the Second Vatican Council formally stated that responsibility for Jesus' death cannot be assigned to all Jewish people of his time, let alone Jews today, and explicitly rejected anti-Semitism rooted in Christian teaching. So, if the question is, who killed Jesus? The honest answer is, an empire did what empires do. Power crushed a threat. Systems silenced a voice calling for a different, better world. And if Christians really want to honor Jesus, the lesson is not to blame a people group. It is to ask a harder question. When systems of power silence truth today, whose side are we actually on?